I want to read the Wikipedia article on the Venus of Dolní Věstonice. This is the one of the oldest ceramic objects in the world. Okay, so the Venus of Dolní Věstonice is a Venus figurine, a ceramic statuette of a nude female figure dated to 29,000 to 2500 BCE in the Gravitian industry. It was found at the Paleolithic site of Dolní Věstonice in the Moravian Basin south of Brno, in the base of Devin Mountain in what is today the Czech Republic. This figurine and a few others from locations nearby are the oldest known ceramic articles in the world. Details on production. So it has a height of just under 4.5 inches and a width of just over 1.5 inches. At its widest, it's made of clay fired at a relatively low temperature, 5 to 800 degrees C. The statuette follows the general morphology of other Venus figurines, having exceptionally large breasts, belly and hips, perhaps symbols of fertility, a relatively small head, and little detail on the rest of the body. A feature which no longer remains a part of the sculpture is the fact that it is thought to have been originally ornamented with 4 feathers. This is evidenced by the 4 small holes on the top of the head. Although the type of feather has not been determined, the holes are said to be produced with a tool that is relatively sharp, of which a feather would satisfy. The Paleolithic settlement of Dolní Věstonice in Moravia is a part of Czechoslovakia at the time organized excavation began, now located in Czechia, the Czech Republic, has been under systematic archaeological research since 1924, initiated by Karel Absalon. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. In addition to the Venus figurine, figures of animals, such as bear, lion, mammoth, horse, fox, rhino, and owl, and more than 2,000 balls of burnt clay have been found at Dolní Věstonice. Now, here's the interesting part. The figurine was discovered on the 13th of July, 1925, in a layer of ash broken into 2 pieces. It was found situated in a central fireplace. What does that tell you? That tells me that it was thrown away into a fire. And that gives the distinct possibility that that is the manner in which it was actually fired. So that means that you have this very distinct possibility that it was not used as a fired piece of ceramic, but it was used as an object that was just made out of dried clay. And that it became a fired piece of clay, a fired piece of pottery, after it was discarded. Thrown into a fireplace, because now it's broken. It's broken into 2 pieces, in a layer of ash, in a central fireplace. They threw it away. They unambiguously threw it away, and they threw it away into a fire. And if it's in a layer of ash, then it was thrown probably into a fire that was on fire at the time that it was thrown in. And that explains the relatively low firing temperature of 5 to 800 degrees C. And also, it could explain, so like when it was used, when it was an object that had some value, perhaps it had feathers in those holes at the top of the head. And when you throw it into the fire, those get burned away, and they're gone. I feel like the entire situation for this object, which is the oldest, or one of the very oldest ceramic objects known, the nature of it indicates that we're not dealing with intentional fired pottery. We're dealing with very, very, very potentially, I might even venture to say probably, a tradition here where what we're doing is we're producing things out of clay, and the object, that the resultant dried clay object, is the end goal. That is the product that you want. And in this case, it was thrown away into a fire, and that resulted in it being fired and being preserved for archaeology. But the ones that were not thrown into a fire, like this, were lost to archaeology because they just disintegrated in the rain and humidity and, you know, whatever, in the weather. See, in these other ones, it could be a similar situation, right? Because we have figurines of animals and 2,000 balls of burnt clay. So I don't know the details on those, but it could be a similar situation. And then a little bit further down, so scientists periodically examine the statuette. A tomograph scan in 2004 found a fingerprint of a child estimated at between 7 and 15 years of age, fired into the surface. The child who handled the figurine before it was fired is considered to be an unlikely candidate for its maker. So, why is there a fingerprint in the clay that is not a fingerprint of somebody who made it? Well, if the intended life cycle of this object was as simply dried clay, anybody touching it with moist or wet fingers is going to leave a fingerprint in the clay, aren't they? So if the intended... So, I feel like this is pretty good evidence that this was actually just a dried clay object, part of a larger tradition here of using dried clay as a normal material for things. And, you know, it was whatever, it was somewhere maybe passed down to this child, or maybe something, you know, somewhere, and they found it and their hands were wet and they touched it, so they got a fingerprint in it. Kind of messed up the surface a little bit. And then at some later point, the object was thrown away, discarded into a fire, it was thus fired and preserved. I feel like that's a fairly likely situation here. Otherwise, all of these details are weird. Like, okay, so it was originally ornamented with feathers, but if it's just fired clay, the feathers are just going to want to fall out. How are you going to keep them in there? Well, was there some kind of bonding? Was there some sort of glue used? There's no evidence of that that's indicated. Okay. Well, if it was dried clay, the only thing you need to do to bond the feathers in there is to wet the feathers slightly, and they'll stick to the clay. And then they'll stay in there pretty nicely. Why was it found in a layer of ash, broken into two pieces, in a central fireplace? And why aren't we mentioning that that's a possible situation that caused it to be fired? Why would you assume that it was fired outside of that situation and then introduced into that situation later on? I don't know. I feel like this is evidence for what I'm suggesting here. There's something along the lines of what I'm suggesting.